Word First Radio.
Hey, what's up, you guys? Welcome to Word First Radio, the podcast brought to you by Word First Ministries. I am your host, Jacob O'Neill, and as always, I'm joined by my friend Cameron.
Hey.
And we're back with John Ingve and Vishesh.
Hello, hello.
Hey.
You guys doing so good?
Yeah.
It's been so long since this is the last time
Did you
we saw
get
you.
a haircut, Jacob?
I did get a haircut. Let the record
looks
reflect
really
that
nice.
Jacob O'Neill got a haircut. That's right, and shaved.
He did.
That's right. So Vishesh, we have you back. We had so much fun last time. I really enjoyed that. And if anyone at home, if you're wondering, gosh, you guys spent so much time asking him questions, and you offered pushback and feedback, and it seems really unfair. When does he get to ask you questions? Right now, he gets to ask us questions. So we're doing something today that I've wanted to do. This is just going to be adding the pressure on. So here we go. I've wanted to do this for a long time. I've wanted to have somebody come on and pressure the Christians, if you will, or ask us questions about our worldview. And it's going to be something I'm going to call a reverse interview, where the guest interviews the host and the host's friends. So you're still outnumbered. You're still on our turf, as we said last time. But I'm really looking forward to hearing what you're curious about and what you're interested in asking us.
You
excited?
Yeah, and a little nervous, but let's see how it goes. So when you posited the idea to me, I think the first few things that I was interested in, I look at it more or less like a story, but from what I understand, this is a complete way of explaining the world in many ways, Christianity. So I would kind of be interested in asking, what are the fundamental axioms of Christianity? Now, I know that's a very kind of, it's a loaded question to ask first, and it can be very broad.
Sure.
But what are the kind of first things that you would take as granted when you say the word Christianity or the Christian system?
Yeah. What's interesting about that question is that I think some of us might answer it a little differently, if you will. I don't want to just assume first crack at it. Did you guys want to?
I'll go, but I'm not going to
sure.
be very helpful. So I think when we think of axioms, it's sort of what are the unprovable assumptions of a system? And as far as Christianity is concerned, I don't think we have any more unprovable assumptions about the world than any other worldview does. And I don't think it rests on different axioms. However, if the question is something like, what are the fundamentals? What are the features of Christianity that if they're missing, it's not Christianity anymore? What C.S. Lewis called mere Christianity? Like what's the core that if you don't have that, it's not Christianity, and if you do, it is? What's the essence of the the system or the faith, or however you want to broadly define it? That, I think, Jacob, you ought to answer. You'd be great at that. You would be great at answering that too. You guys, I think, can take that. But I think we should draw a distinction between axioms as a worldview. It's not like I have to assume different unprovable things about the world, and if I do that, I can get to the Christian faith. I think that we can have the same basic unprovable assumptions about the world as a skeptic or people of other faith traditions. I think we can agree on all of those, but then maybe the way, like we talked about during the episode where we interviewed you, but the way that we test and experience the world can lead us to different conclusions.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And so I think that that's a really good clarification. So if we're thinking about, if in the term axiom we're including unprovable, then I kind of just mostly would just agree with everything that Cam said. I think the same as yours, you know what I mean? Like really similar. But if what we're talking about is like, okay, what are the things that Christianity takes for granted?
What are the essential features?
Yeah.
That might be a better way of phrasing it. Yeah.
Sure. The essential features of Christianity. I think it's, to keep it as simple as possible, that God exists, an entity called God exists, that he's triune, that he's all-powerful, all-knowing, that he has certain fundamental attributes, in himself. He is just, he is mercy, he is loving, he is in charge of the universe and the creator of the universe. Christianity also, the essential feature of that is that the Bible is the Word of God. There's a couple different understandings of what that means for the Bible to be the Word of God, but as simple as it gets, it's that this is one of the ways God has decided to communicate with mankind. He has given us His Word. It teaches us about His character, His wants, His commands. It teaches us about ourselves. That Jesus is God in human form. It would be another essential feature of Christianity, that Jesus pre-existed his earthly life, came down, became a human being, that he lived a life without sin. So he never did the wrong thing ever. At the end of his life, he died on the cross, taking paying for the sins of the world, and then 3 days later rose from the dead. And that if you believe that he did that for you, and repent of your sin and choose to follow Jesus, dedicate your life to him, you can spend eternity with him in heaven one day.
Gotcha.
Is that generally the story, the fundamental features of the story?
Yeah.
Any disagreement?
I think so. Alvin Plantinga talks about it as, he goes, if you take the great Christian confessions and just wherever they overlap.
That's true. Yeah. And I mean, kind of historically, now we're talking about church history. You shouldn't have said that, Cam, because I'm going to go off on a tangent. But
without talking about church history.
That's impossible. There have been three early confessions, if you will, of the Christian faith. And these are confessions that what they were trying to set out to do was like, okay, what do all Christians believe?
It was to answer your question.
Answer your question.
Yeah.
And so those three confessions are the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, and the Athanasian Creed. And wherever they overlap, I think that was a great way of putting it. Yeah, those are the essential features of Christianity.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And one thing I would just tie together with what Cameron said is that there are various, there have been many like people who have tried to systematize these theological sort of axioms, you might call them, with a rational argument. So how do we get from some base assumptions like I exist, therefore I am, and that logic is something that governs the world, or somehow you can use logic, right? We have to assume those things.
Right.
There are different philosophers who have worked their way from that or from other assumptions to these Christian ideas. So that's the one thing I would add. Yeah.
So the way that you described it, it was more or less sequential, right? It's not parallel in the sense that you have to, God exists is the first kind of requirement, and then the rest of it follows, or is some of it independent as well from the story?
I think that my gut reaction, Cam, I want to hear what you have to say, I promise. My gut response to that is, I think that that's right, because that's kind of the foundation upon which everything else kind of rests in. Because, I mean, if you don't have God, you don't have anything that's God's word. Right. You don't have God incarnate with Jesus. You don't have anything that rises people from the dead. Anything that he created.
Right.
So, sure. I could see that. What were you going to say?
Yeah, it's both. So Christianity is a historic faith, and it includes facts of history, which took place in space and time. So, I think there was a true people of God before there was a Christianity, right? And that was the people of Israel. And I believe before there was a people of Israel, that there was humanity located in a single place on the earth that related with God in a certain way. And before there was a humanity, there was a universe. And before there was a universe, there was just God and maybe some stuff he hasn't told us about. Right. So there's a sequence because God he's done things in time, and so we're describing what he's done in history, but also he's related to humanity in a certain way. He's decided to include us in his existence and his experience in a certain way. So there are going to be historical facts, but there are things we can know about God that are not
tangible.
That are logically simultaneous. So we can know that God is that God exists, that he's all powerful, that he is immense, that he is maximal, he lacks nothing, that he has all of the qualities that are good to have to their maximal measure, and a number of other qualities of God, things we can know about him that are logically simultaneous and don't depend on the unfolding of history. But that's the story of God is not just who he is in himself. That's the beginning of the story, but how he relates to humanity, why the universe exists rather than nothing, and what the purpose of that was, and then what's the purpose of humankind, and what's God's purpose in having relationship with us of a certain kind. So you'd expect to see sequence there.
Gotcha. But I feel like the way everybody kind of talks about, or from the way that I've seen Christianity discussed is more or less as a group faith, right? These are the tenets that we as a group believe in together. But I'm also interested in asking from an individual perspective, how do you find out about, because that would be what interests me the most, is that, say, for example, you've never heard of Christianity if you weren't born into a Christian family. Say I'm Hindu, right? Say, for example, I know generally that in a different faith, and the idea of somebody called Jesus exists. So if I was completely new to the faith, how is the story of Christianity told? Because and the reason why I asked that question is because I'd be interested in asking, how do you come to believe in it? In the sense that first you're told it as a story, right? Where does it become belief? Where does it go from story to belief?
Oh man.
I think maybe I could answer this first, because that's a transition that happened for me somewhat recently. So I was born into a Christian family, and the thing that often happens is you get these story sort of implanted through your family, your upbringing, and your environment. And then as you grow up, you hear conflicting or seemingly conflicting worldviews, and that might make you wonder, is my worldview, the one that I've been taught from my parents, is it correct? And that's what happened to me. I as I was going through school, learning about science and physics and chemistry, and also hearing my peers who were mostly non-Christian, it starts to become very challenging to actually believe it, especially because the studying the evidence for our faith is not something we had. It's not something that interested me as a child, and so it wasn't brought up. And so I did have a point where I knew I didn't believe, but I was holding on to the story because I also have a problem, which is as a human, I know I'm going to die. And that's a problem that I've had
Since you were born.
since I was born, right? Or it's a problem I struggled with to understand and to come to terms with, right? And so that was my motivation to keep Christianity rather than abandon it completely. Then, somewhat coincidentally, I was introduced into arguments about Christianity, and when I realized it's actually possible that it's not just a antiquated belief system to help us deal with the reality, which is we're all going to die and the universe is meaningless. When I realized there's actual evidence that you can find in science and looking in history, that's when I started to change my beliefs. And so for a while, I was sort of agnostic, where I didn't really know which one was the best. And then there came a point where I decided that I was now, well, I didn't really decide. I think it sort of just happens. You get an amount of evidence that just moves you to one side rather than the other. And the only way you control that, I think, is how much you let in, sort of, and the quality of what you let in, right? And so there was a point where I wasn't really believing, and then given research, I came to believe, which is where I find myself now.
Yeah, I think like anything else, people more or less believe what makes sense.
Yeah.
And trying to understand why and how we form certain beliefs is almost impossible. I mean, it involves some rational motives, lots of irrational or sub-rational motives.
Emotional.
How we fit in with our social group and who is important to us. And we watch people's beliefs change throughout their life in ways that are sometimes surprising, because I think I think we overestimate how rational we are.
Yeah.
So I think in my experience is you believe what makes sense.
Yeah.
But there comes a time in some people's lives, like we all know each other. You guys know each other. Vishesh and John Ingve know each other from work. But Vishesh was kind of brought into our community through our skeptics evening, and I count us all as like skeptical people.
Yeah.
And it's not like we have the Christians and the skeptics then join us. It's like, no, I think we sort of have a skeptical outlook, which is okay, prove it. And I'm an okay, prove it kind of guy. And so there came a point for me where I just wondered, is this stuff all true? Is it reasonable? And that's what a lot of people do with a lot of beliefs. We sort of believe them and we don't know why. We come to believe the things, and then we challenge them in certain ways. And some beliefs we just don't challenge at all. We leave them over there. And other beliefs we gotta poke at. And for me, because I think we've all come to belief in a similar way, but I know people who have come to have faith in Jesus whose faith journey looks nothing like mine, right? So mine is a particular case, but for me, it's like, okay, I got to poke this thing. I got to see what works. And you said, Vishesh, several times when we talked to you the last time you were on, something like, I want to go test the world, right? I want like Emerson, and I want to go and experience the world, and I want to test it. And every time you did, I had this little grin in my heart, because it's actually the scriptures that tell us to test all things and hold on to what's good. So there is something about the Christian faith that has to do with seeing the world, experiencing it, acknowledging reality, confronting reality, testing it, and holding on to the things that are good, to whatever passes the test.
Yeah.
And that's something like my experience. So I, like Jacob and John Ingve, had the benefit of growing up in a more or less Christian house. But there came a time in my life when I got to investigate the central claims of the faith, and of course I was pleased to find out that they hold up, and a number of my beliefs changed, and the things that I realized I had assumed, it wasn't a crisis, but it was like, okay, this thing does stand, right? I got to go push on it, and okay, it does stand up. I think that's something like what my experience was like.
Yeah. I think I think a lot of what I would say would repeat a lot of what Cameron explained. So kind of from a really early age, mostly just because of how my dad is hardwired. It was really drilled into me, like there's we need to have evidence for our beliefs, so we need to know why we believe the things that we do. And so where it to get back to exactly to your question, right? When did it go from a story to belief? I think is how you said it. Kind of in my case, at least instantly, like, well, at least I was told, like, that's how it has to be. Like, it's not just a story. This is something now we like have to believe or have reasons why we believe it. Yeah. And I think one of the things, this could be a whole other conversation in itself, but consider this as like an add-on to like what Cam said, because our stories are so similar. One of the things for me that kind of like raises up gets my attention, if you will, is because in my, studies of like the different religions and major worldviews, it seems like Christianity is telling a story, if you will, that sounds very different, actually. I think from what anyone else is saying at the table, and the story that it tells seems to line up exactly with my experience. And we can get into that later, if you will, but I think it's telling a different story. And I think it's telling a one that lines up with my experience of the world.
Yeah, we talked a bit about worldview in the last episode. Right. It's like that. It's like, well, I put this pair of glasses on, and then I saw things clearly. That's what C.S. Lewis says, right? He says, I believe in Christianity as I believe the sun has risen, not just because I see it, but because by it I see everything else.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
beautiful.
Anything smart that I've ever said is just me paraphrasing C.S. Lewis, and Cam just direct quoted him. But I think that answers your question.
So I would follow up, ask how has your experience testing that fundamental axiom then, or if you want to call it that, is that the existence of God per se, or the belief that there is an entity of some sort. Right. Is it human in any way, shape, or form? I don't know. You can probably answer that. And is it something that you need to be able to interact with to verify its existence, or does it have to be something that you can put your innate belief in? Like, how do you construe God as an entity?
I think that's really good. If you don't mind, I'll go ahead and start. I'll start with this one. And then we'll go. I guess we'll go the other way. Like we went from Ingve to Cameron to me. And for those of you who can't see us, that's how we're sitting on the table. So we'll go the other way now. Kind Kind of more or less. So I think for me, like I put like my beliefs about like my Christian beliefs almost kind of like on a plausibility spectrum of things that like I generally don't doubt, to where things I could see myself doubting but don't, and like things I still question, if you will. So when it comes to like God's existence, like I'm not saying this with like a heavy hand or saying this with like, oh, well, I'm up here and you guys are not. I'm trying to be as honest as possible. It's really, really, really hard for me to doubt God's existence. It's been a very long time since I've doubted God's existence. I think I said that a few times. And so if you're going to try to show me or show me with some philosophical evidence that God doesn't exist, as far as I'm concerned, that's a high bar. And so how do I go about doing that? Because that's what you kind of asked, was like, is this something you have to interact with to show that God exists? Well, I think generally that if you're going to show that or be reasonably convinced that an entity like God exists, I think that's going to be outside the tools of science, because I think that God is a non-physical, personal entity. I wouldn't say human. I would say personal. So his conscience, he has a thought, he has feelings, if you will, he has agency as a person. And so if we're going to be reasonably convinced that someone like that exists, it's going to be outside of the tools of science because he's not physical, he's not material. And I think that there are good philosophical arguments to show that, yeah, it's plausible. It's very plausible that a being like that exists. So we talked about some of them in the last episode we had with you on. But one that I find very powerful, actually, I have a book that I need to give you. I was going to give it to John Ingve, and I still can, but I will give it to you, Vishesh, as well. It's called How Reason Can Lead to God by Joshua Rasmussen. He's a Christian philosopher. And so he unpacks an argument from contingency, which we briefly talked about last episode, which is because of the existence of contingent things, which are just things that depend on something else, there must be at least one necessary thing. And to claim that God is a necessary thing is about as sure of knowing that, of thinking that the thing exists as like you can be, to say that it's necessary.
Necessary by definition means it can't fail to have existed.
Exactly.
Right. Asking the question, why does this thing exist, is nonsense.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it can't have failed to exist. Yeah.
And I think that argument, the short story is, I think that argument has a lot of plausibility. I think it's really good. I think it's, first of all, it's very old. It goes back to even Aquinas, talks about contingency arguments. And I think it has a lot of plausibility. So I start there, and maybe we can move on to the climbing up the ladder. But I think as far as like God's existence goes, I do not see myself ever changing my mind on that. Not because I'm trying to be stubborn or closed-minded. I think it's really compelling, the arguments and the idea of God being necessary. I think that idea has so much plausibility that I can't see myself denying it personally.
We did an episode with our friend Marius, and he's somebody who was not a believer in any sense and then came to be a faithful Christian. And he says this literally. He says, literally, I think it is more rational to believe in God's existence than my own existence. He's like, rationally speaking, it's more likely that God exists and I am a figment of his imagination than that I exist and God is a figment of my imagination. Sure. And he gets there without you ask him to explain himself. And we did. You can listen to it on that episode. Yeah. I think he talks, I'm sure he does. I know he's talked to me about it personally. Marius, maybe we'll have you on to explain just that. Yeah. But he gets there without any sort of stories from the Bible or history or anything. And just says, no, if God is philosophically, if we just think real hard about the world and the nature of existence, you have to have a God to exist for anything else to exist, including me. And whether I'm physical or a figment of his mind, it's more likely that he's real and I'm less real than that I'm real and imagining that God exists, something like that. And so I think my answer to your question, I don't know that I have a very exciting one, but the Christian story has two parts. The first part is a little bit about what we just talked about. Like, you can think really hard and understand some things about you can understand that God exists and some things about him. And the scriptures even say this, that God's invisible attributes, his great power, we can see just by looking at the creation that there's enough evidence that is accessible to our minds and through our senses, that we can look at the world and come to know truly that God's real, that God exists. But then the other part of the picture is what Jacob referred to as the Word of God. We were talking about are the essentials of the faith, or that we have some scriptures. And those scriptures are the Word of God. What does that mean? That means that God communicated to humankind in some way. And the contents of that communication, it's the stuff that we wouldn't know about God if he didn't tell us. So Christianity, as opposed to so many of the other world religions, is a revealed religion. So I end up being a little bit impatient with people who talk to me about my Christian faith like it's a hobby. It's like, why'd you choose that one instead of this one? As though they're all more or less made up, and they're the stories that we pretend, that like we get together and we live our lives according to, based on what kind of benefits it confers to us as individuals and as a group. I go, no. God is real, and then told us what he's like. And that's not optional. That's not changeable. So sometimes people ask things like, why doesn't Christianity catch up with the sensibilities of the day? I go, it's not optional. God told us what he's like and that he doesn't change. And so we don't get to just reimagine. Like we don't get to sort of reboot Christianity with it's like the new Sherlock series, right? Like the new Sherlock with
the new Sherlock series.
with what's his name? It looks different than all of the Sherlocks that have been produced in the past. And it's like, well, it's updated with cell phones and modern sensibilities and technology. And it's like, well, you can do that with a story that has a human author. But why doesn't the story of God change? Why doesn't Christianity change? Well, because God hasn't changed. And we don't get to just change his story. It's not, it's what he has revealed to us about himself, which is changeless. Now, there's stuff in our Christian practice and our ritual and how we practice, the language that we use. There are things about the Christian faith as a practice that definitely do change with the times. But who God is as revealed, like we believe God's communicated with us and said, here's what I'm like, here are my priorities, here's what it means to live well. And that stuff is non-changeable.
Yeah. I would basically echo what you guys already said, like, but there is also, like, for me, there's two components to it. There's the rational arguments. I do think I put a lot of stock in the contingency arguments. Like, I was fascinated one day when I was at Bible school in Germany, hiking up a mountain. The weight of the question, why is there something rather than nothing, hit me for the first time, and I spent that whole hike up the mountain thinking about that. And I think the way I conclude is that there has to be a necessary being. So, and then you can add on to that more arguments that you, for example, take from what we know about science. I mean, most atheists who I think are worth listening to will admit that the nature and life, at the very least, has the appearance of design.
Right.
And I think that points to and gives evidence to the belief that God really does this, that the designer really does exist. Of course, these are not conclusive proofs, but they are what you would call, you can make an abductive argument.
That's an argument.
Yeah, abductive, yeah.
That means the best explanation.
Yeah. And so the second part, that's one thing. Like, if I didn't have that part, I could be convinced that it's just, I don't know, something I'm imagining, which is the next part. It's the experience I've had. Now, don't get me wrong. Most of my life, I have not experienced the presence of God in every moment. Like most moments, I don't experience God's presence. But then there are moments where I have, when I try to understand what's happened to me, the best way, the simplest way to explain it, and the one that makes most sense, is I encountered a mind beyond my own. And that's something we can get into if you want, but I'll just end it there.
Yeah, and I think I'm going to say one thing real quickly is we talked before, and Vishesh, you had mentioned sort of the beauty of discovering what black holes are like, and it started as sort of a mathematical postulate in order to explain some observations we saw. Like, we got some stuff over here moving way too fast in a way that it shouldn't, and so we can do some physics and some math, but then we can experiment, and then we can infer what these things must be like, and we get better and better and better information. And now we have photographs of the things, which is crazy. I remember in 7th grade, I checked out a book on stars to try and find a picture of a black hole, and all we had were like drawings. Right? And that, I mean, seventh grade was a long time ago for me, but in geological terms, it wasn't that long ago. And now at this point in my life, we have photos of the thing. And our discovery of God can be a lot like that too, where it's like, okay, there's something, like there must be something like God. There are features of my existence that are best explained by maybe it's a first mover, maybe it's a necessary being. And then we can keep asking questions. We can keep testing the idea and getting a better and better picture of what this ground of reality must be like. Okay, we'll realize that this ground of reality must be personal. So now we can call him or her or it or something, but it has a personal component. It's not merely a force. It's not a particle. It's not a collection of things. If you have one necessary being, you have just one necessary being. Okay, so it's one thing. And like I said, by thinking real hard, we can learn a whole lot. And then we have the benefit that God revealed himself to us and said, okay, here's the stuff you guys couldn't have figured out on your own. And it turns out that those things, if we're still using our metaphor for worldview, help to make that stuff he tells us about himself. We go, oh, wow. Okay, that really does make sense of the rest of my existence so much better than when I didn't have that. I mean, I don't want to be vulgar, but I have that data. It's like, now that I've got that data, the rest of my experience is so much more sharp and precise.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing that with me. But yeah, and I appreciate like such thorough answers as well. The thing I was curious about was, where does it go from being something to an entity? It's like, why does it have to necessarily be an entity?
Do you mean like someone?
Yeah, especially of humanoid attributes.
Yeah.
Or at least being capable of like
Consciousness.
communications and
Consciousness, communication,
Something
and all
like
that,
us.
Yeah.
Sure.
Because I can give you that. I don't agree with it, but let's say that there's a quote unquote prime mover. How does that go from? Why does the prime mover have to be conscious or intelligent or in any way, shape, or form like humans?
Yeah, there are a few ways to get there. So some of it is purely philosophical. So that's sort of the classical arguments for God's existence that then conceive him as a maximal being. Start with things like a first mover. And there's no reason a first mover has to have consciousness or be personal in any sense. That's a long, I think it's interesting, but that's kind of a long conversation. But it comes with more arguments. So it comes with further argumentation. So, for example, if we have there's a first cause, we start with a first cause. Okay, well, what does something have to be like in order to be able to create effects with the power of causation in itself, but without being first acted upon? And what you get is something like it has to have the power of volition, and to have the power of volition that requires mental capacities or something like that. So that's one strain of that's one flavor. I'm not making the argument there. We could do that another time. That's one road. Another road is God's revealed himself to us and told us what he's like. So I could conceive of, okay, this God thing is real, but I conceive of it as a ground of reality that's not personal in any sense. But then I have what's revealed about God. He tells me this reality gives me some scriptures and says, I'm a person and I'm the foundation of existence and my name is that I am, and here's what I want, here's why I made you, and here's what I want from you, and here's how you can know, and here's what happens, like I want you to be my people and I will be your God, and here's what that looks like. And if you fail to be that way, then here are the kind of consequences you can expect. So you have an answer from Revelation. So one is just sort of pure reason. Another is revelation, and another one is personal experience. So I have friends, I'm thinking of one now, who came to believe and came to worship Jesus and down this personal experience path. And her story was that she practiced witchcraft, and she told me, she goes, Cam, I know demons are real because I've interacted with them, I've experienced them. Demons are real, and the only thing that stops them is the name of Jesus. So I need to know what this Jesus guy is like. Some people have that kind of experience. Other people have had visions of Jesus and come to believe in him. I won't give. The point is not to give example. Paul. But Paul was already a theist, but yeah, Paul, who got his theology all cleaned up. People who you wouldn't expect to be believers in God get a vision of Jesus, shows up to them and says, and tells them this is who I am. And I think that that's one of the beautiful things is that there are various paths to the truth. There aren't various truths, but like we said earlier, people we believe what makes sense to us, and not everybody makes sense of the world with the same using the same faculties.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that God has left evidence, call it evidence, but like whatever people need based on how they interact with the world, how they make sense of the world, he's given the opportunity to discover him based in each of those paths, right? So we're not all on the same intellectual path, right? So we experience the world differently, and God's left an experience of himself for people who go about interacting with the world with different emphases. Does that make sense of what I
That
said?
makes sense, because I was just about to say ditto.
Okay.
I pretty much agree with all of that, especially the first thing he said. But
I appreciate the fact that you've shown so many ways of like getting to it. But something that popped up to me is that sounds like, because there's enough stories where people don't believe in Jesus the same way, right? Because for example, for me, I don't arrive at that conclusion, either through experience or through logic or my reasoning per se. So there's an equivalent amount maybe of ways of getting to it and then not getting to it as well, or getting to something else. But the interesting thing that and correct me if I'm wrong, but that posits to me about Christianity is that it purports to be the true religion.
The true religion.
Yep.
Yes.
Why doesn't it? Why isn't there room for error?
Well, that kind of gets into one of the thing I said at the very end of your first question. If I may, I would love, and then we'll let I want John Ingve to say something as well, because he looked like he wanted to say something. The reason why is I would say just by virtue of the claims it makes about God and how human beings are supposed to relate to God. So the idea is, if you know anything about Christianity, it's that human beings, because of our own free will, decided to break a relationship that God intended us to have with him, a relationship of love, of care, to provide for us and take care of everything we've ever needed. And there's really the only one command he gave us was to choose me. And that is represented, if you will, in the Garden of Eden, right? I give you this beautiful garden. All I told you to do was to enjoy it and go make a bunch of kids. Just don't do this one thing, and trust me that I've done that I've given you everything you need. You don't need anything else. And human beings, of course, decided to not listen to him. They decided, nope, God's holding out on us. We need to go get this other thing that he said we shouldn't have. They did it anyways, and because as a result of that, all human beings tend to have that tendency to choose, we're going to choose not what God wants, we're going to choose what we want instead. A lot of religions will pretty much agree on that kind of fundamental level, that God wants us to do something, we want to do something else, and because of that, a relationship between us and God is broken. Where it differs, I think, from most of the other religions, and this is where Christianity becomes a little exclusive, or a lot exclusive, is on how that problem is solved. I think when you survey a lot of other religions, the problem is generally solved by changing human behavior. So you need to say the right prayer, or do the right ritual, or change your mind about the right things, or do something to show God that, like, okay, this person, say, was Vishesh. All right, Vishesh is actually, he's trying. All right, he's doing his best. He's trying to get it done and
become worthy.
And become worthy. You're like, okay, you've done enough good things over bad things. So now when you die, you get to go to the good place and not the bad place. And Christianity just tells a totally different story, which is that the problem is not primarily or even centrally an issue of human behavior. Human behavior, or humans doing bad things, is a symptom of the problem, but it's not the problem itself. And Christianity would teach that the problem is with the human heart. The problem with the world is that humans want to do the wrong thing. So the question is, how do we solve that problem? I think Christianity has a different answer than the other religions, which is twofold. One is, you can't solve the problem on your own. And the second one is someone else has to do it for you. Spoiler alert, who that is. I think it was Jesus. Jesus has to solve the problem for you. You can't change your own heart. You can't change your own desires. You can't stop wanting to do the wrong thing on your own. Jesus has to do it for you. He has to come and help us with that. And not only does he help us with that, he takes care of the entire thing. So all of the prayers we could have said, the rituals we could have done, the good things to make God happy with us or to become worthy, like Cam said, anything that we could have tried to do, Jesus actually did in our place, live the life that you and I have failed to live in that regard. Because we could never do enough rituals, we could never say enough prayers or do the right thing to become worthy. I just don't think that that's possible. I think I just know myself too well.
Right. You can't. Yeah. I mean, we know that from our experience. You can't uncheat on your wife, right?
Exactly.
You can't undo you can't undo the sin that you have done. Right. And so in order for it to sort of not count against you, your account has to be replaced. I said that really badly. Jacob's telling.
So what Christ does is what Jesus does is he replaces your account.
Right.
So our account is in like the negative infinity balance. we have done the wrong thing and have failed to do the right thing. And Jesus never did either. He always did the right thing and never failed to do the right thing. And so what Christianity offers is Jesus's account can become yours. Your spots can be flipped. Yeah. God can treat Jesus like he lived your life, and God can treat you as if you lived Jesus's life. And the only option is not to say the right prayer or join the right club or call yourself the right thing or do the right stuff. The option is accept that or reject it.
Yeah.
And that's where I think that's the different story I was talking about. I don't see that anywhere else.
Which means that there's a right way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, but that is where I would question the first thing is like, why does there need to be a right way? Why can't there be multiple right ways?
Yeah,
Which
so-
is the always.
I'm sorry. Please finish, and then I'll tell you what I think.
Whenever I've heard of Christianity and talked about it in detail, it sounds like a very oppressive religion to me, in the sense that it asks you to do a very specific subset of things in a very specific way, and it tells you a very specific story. It doesn't leave a lot of room for interpretation, for exploration. For example, I would Hinduism, I feel, does it quite well, is that you can kind of get rid of all the gods and it's fine, because it still allows you to say, hey, even if you don't want to believe in this stuff, it's fine. You can go out, figure your old worldview, but these are the kind of things that we suggest that you can kind of go and experiment with. There is no linear... what's the word for it? There's no strict story that this is the thing that happened. It's the one thing that's always rubbed me the wrong way about Christianity, and I'm sorry if that comes off the wrong way.
That's fine.
It's just that
that's okay.
It's just very strict in the way that it happens, and I feel like that's the reason why a lot of the people don't enjoy it, or at least I don't sometimes. It's just the fact that it doesn't leave me with a lot of personal agency, in the sense that I want to be able to arrive on my own conclusions. I would like to arrive on the conclusion of Jesus on my own, if that is the true story. But it presumes that I kind of have to accept that these are the things that happen, and then asks me to believe in them. There's no reverse way of getting there.
Well, I have a couple of thoughts. I'll try
and this real quick, guys. This is going to have to be like the last round.
Yeah,
of
course.
of exchange, because we have to wrap up soon.
I'll try,
which just means we'll have to do a part 3.
Yeah,
but anyways,
I'm excited about
go
that.
ahead,
I'll
Cam,
try and share them very quickly. So the first thing I'll say is, the Bible. That's a thick book, right? There's a lot in there. If you even just the 66 books of sort of the traditional Protestant canon, that's a lot of pages. And I've read many thousands of pages of theology and history and doctrine and things related to Christian belief and practice. And the number of things that are essential are vanishingly few. I mean, the great creeds we talked about, like where do the creeds overlap? I mean, that's a couple of paragraphs. Maybe it's 200 words, and that's in really like explanatory and beautiful language. The number of essentials in the Christian faith are very few, and the amount of freedom in the Christian faith is vast. but the essentials are essential because they're describing the actual nature of the problem and the actual solution to the problem. And you have to affirm those or the problem hasn't been solved. And I think that's true of, we can at least understand that instinctively based on how we solve any problem. And I think I understand the idea that it's strict and oppressive, and the demands on your life are very high. But that's I think maybe there's a better way of understanding that, and we can talk about that. The point is not, here are all the things you need to do to become worthy. To Jacob's point is, you were not, and Jesus did that stuff.
Yeah.
So Jesus handled all of the things you need to do to be worthy stuff, and you get to inherit his worthiness, not because God was already smiling at you. All of that justice stuff, it happened to Jesus. He has purchased your worthiness. And I love the way they say it in Norwegian, that Jesus has purchased us free. I love that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Jesus has accomplished all of that stuff you couldn't do, and he has given you freedom, and he has made you worthy. And then the rest is, okay, so how do I respond? And how do I live as a child of the King and the maker of the universe and the designer of my being and my essence? And that is it's the opposite of restrictive. It's like an inflated way of existing.
That's what I was going to say.
According to like living to the standard of your true nature. It's not to oppress you and squish all of your possibilities into this tiny actuality. It's actually to expand and say, no, here's who you are actually, and live in the light of that. And when it's like we look at this world, we think it's very broad, but what we're doing is actually boxing ourselves into our limited wisdom and our basic human fleshly desires. And God says, no, I have so much more for you than that. So in two ways, I think I would say that maybe that's to lack a little bit of perspective to see Christianity as I get it. And it feels to a lot of Christians like, here are the rules I have to keep and the demands that are made on my life, and it squishes me in and forces me on this really thin like wire that I have to walk on for my life. But I think that's wrong in two ways. The first is, when it comes to doctrine, the essentials are very few, and they're essential because they're actually essential. They're not capricious. They're not arbitrary. It's not like, well, if you want to be a Christian, you have to believe that there are 84,000 angels in heaven or something. It's like, no. You have to understand the nature of the problem, which is a human propensity to sin and our broken souls. You have to understand the nature of the problem, which is that we are in front of holy God, whose eyes cannot look upon injustice or wrongdoing. In his eyes, we have failed, and then we deserve separation from him. That's the nature of the problem. And then the solution, we'll talk about this. Oh my gosh, maybe on another episode. But I've heard one of my professors talked about the logical coherence of Christian particularism, which is to say, there's a logical reason why that Christian story, the thing you have to believe just this thing, and there's no wiggle room there. There's lots of wiggle room for practice and understanding in other areas of the faith, but in these few things, there's no room for adjustment. That just is. That there's a logical reason why that's the case. It's not arbitrary. It's not what you have to do to join the club, but it's to take seriously the nature of the problem, and then to take seriously God's, like, the only logical solution to the problem. So what God had to I'll say it and I'll be finished. God needed to accomplish mercy and justice at the same time. The only way that happens is with Jesus on the cross.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I've got a lot of thoughts, and I'm struggling to organize them. But I think the way I understand it is, I don't know if kind of like Cameron just finished, I don't know if it's even possible to have what Christianity promises without also Christianity being an exclusive worldview that just comes with these axioms, if you want to call them that. I don't think there is so. I don't think you could have both. And I think I'll just end it at that.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you so much, Vishesh. First of all, I feel horrible because
let's do this lots more times.
We're gonna do this. We'll do this again. Can I get you to commit right now on recording that we'll do it again? We'll do this again because I know that wasn't the end of the list of the questions. But thank you so much for that. Thank you for listening to us say that. Thank you for letting the Christians have the last word on that question. I super appreciate you. And we're going to do this again. So you guys listening at home, stay tuned. This is not going to be the last time you hear from Vishesh. Not going to be the last time you hear us have this conversation together. But we hope you enjoyed it this time. And we'll see you again next week. God bless.
Thank you for listening to Word First Radio. Be sure to like, subscribe, and check us out online at wordfirst.us. Yeah!